Hey friends, in this video, I'll be showing you how I tried to build a server-side ads attribution tool like Hyros, and this video is meant for media buyers. If you're unsure what Hyros is, it's an ad tracking software by this guy called Alex Becker. I know they're awesome. I watch a lot of Alex Becker's YouTube channel, and actually this video is taking inspiration to try and learn from what Hyros is doing. If you're a media buyer, you definitely spend tens of thousands to $1 million of ads. The question that always comes up from clients is, are we tracking our ads as best as possible? So if you're not sure, I actually made a different video on implementing server-side meta ads tracking, but the more I went into this deep rabbit hole of attribution, right, I realized there's actually a lot more you can do, and basically this video will just be me covering what I've built so far. This tool is meant to really track every single touch point a potential customer has with your website, and if let's say they convert down into a high ticket and extremely valuable customer for your business, this is where you want to accrue the data and you want to send the best data back to the Facebook ads platform, because for browser-based tracking, there are inherent limitations with it. And if you're unsure what I'm talking about, please watch my video on server-side tracking of meta ads. By the end of this video, you'll learn the exact tech stack I used to build a server-side tracking system, a live demo of how I capture first touch ad clicks that usually get lost, how I'm using fingerprint.js to create a user ID that's tougher than cookies. Even if people clear their cookies, this will actually theoretically work. And most importantly, you will see this whole experiment actually works or not, right? So my goal here is actually just to connect a first ad click to a final sale and own all the data in between, right? When you sign up for things like Hyros, they would aggregate all your data and make sure they stitch a particular user journey based on their own servers, right? The system I've created allows us to have more data control, and you essentially own all your data, which might be a benefit of what I have just created over here. This means building your own private data warehouse to act as a single source of truth, no matter where the ad platforms claimed. There's no vendor lock-in, and you own your data completely. So why are we doing this? The pain of why I'm doing this is because there's ad blockers, there's Safari blockers, there's iOS 14. If I'm not wrong, Safari's ITP, they automatically strip cookies, they automatically block FB clicks accordingly. So that means that there's certain data sources that are not being tracked correctly. So let's assume that I go to a particular URL. Usually when you have Facebook ads, right, you have the FB clit attached to it, but some browsers just automatically strips anything FB clit related. That's the whole reason why we are doing what we're doing. Let me try to explain in the most layman terms possible manner of what I've built, right? So I'm going to demonstrate what I've built using this dummy website called the52questions.com. The whole process starts on Google Tag Manager, where I install a custom script that will collect as much information as possible. So I won't bore you with the technical details, but in layman terms, I have a script that captures page view, user events, all UTM parameters. I'll track all FB clicks, G clicks, TT clicks. TT clicks refer to clicks on TikTok. I'll collect Facebook cookies if there are. I'll collect both types of Facebook cookies, which are FBP, FBC. I'll collect TikTok cookies. I'll collect GA4 cookies. I'll collect device and browser info. I'll collect the fingerprint visitor ID. I'll collect the consent status. I'll collect basically every single information I can. The reason why we want to collect so much information is to stitch the perfect user journey down the road. What do I mean? If let's say I collect this data early on, the moment they first land up on my website, I'll collect all these details, and down the road, if they eventually do convert, I can see exactly where they came from. And if I can see exactly where they came from, I can then use the conversion API of all the ads platform, whether it's using Facebook conversion API, I can then send the Facebook cookies back to Facebook, and Facebook will be able to precisely tell me where the best conversion comes from. So that's why we want to gather as much detail as possible. Let me demonstrate how this process works from the very start. It's the first time that I'm visiting this website. The most important thing about this process, right, when a person first lands on a website, consent, it's a very, very important thing when it comes to privacy, right? So a user must consent to being, let's say, tracked via cookies or have things installed on their device. If I see and inspect on a cookie layer, you actually don't see any cookies installed at all. So that's one important thing. If I click through everything over here, I actually don't see anything. And the reason why is that I have not clicked consent. So that's the most important thing. If I don't click consent, nothing will happen, right? So let's assume I click consent. Let me inspect, let me click applications, and this is where I can see the cookies populate. So the moment I click accept, all the cookies from everywhere will populate. So if I click accept, you can see here, cookie consent status is granted. And for all these settings, right, the unfortunate truth is there is a need to involve your back-end engineers when it comes to developing a website. Cookies are only fired when the user grants consent. So you can see here all the cookies are fired. FBP, this belongs to Facebook. GA, this belongs to Google Ads or Google Analytics. Anything that has TT belongs to TikTok. This is part 1 of the script. So basically it fires everything and it tracks everything. If you can see here, I've also attached some dummy UTM data. When it comes to running ads on Facebook or Google or TikTok, you can put UTM parameters. These are things we want to capture as well. The next special thing that I would love to share, there's also something called storing this data at a local storage level. What does this mean? I might be butchering and be wrong here. It basically takes all this information and store it on the device data. So all this information right now is stored in my computer. I also have a script that sends this data to my private database of sorts. So currently, I'm sending all this data to a Cloudflare worker. And if you're unsure what a Cloudflare worker is, it is a serverless platform for building and deploying and scaling apps across Cloudflare's global network. Think of it as just a person waiting to receive a particular package based on my limited understanding in coding this, right? When someone visits this page, I have a script that triggers all of this and collects all the good information. This information will then be sent to a Cloudflare worker. This Cloudflare worker would then send all this data to my database of sorts. So this is the database I'm using, Superbase on the back end. And as you can see here, this collects every single thing about a user. Email, origins, language, page URL, platform referral. You can see some good stuff, event type, FBP cookie. So this is the Facebook cookie. I can even see my IP address. I can see a TikTok cookie. I can see my user agent. And basically you can see there's a lot of rich data that's connected. And more importantly, you can see things on the UTM layer, source, medium, everything is captured over here. And the reason why we want to capture it over here is to make sure we try our best to track a particular user journey as much as possible. So you can see here, it even collects the screen resolution. If there's one metric I would like to emphasize on, it will be this metric over here, which is called the fingerprint ID. So there is a library that I'm using, which is called fingerprint.js. It's basically the most advanced open source browser fingerprinting library. Fingerprint.js is an open source client-side browser fingerprint library that queries browser attributes and computes a hash visitor identifier. Unlike cookies and local storage, a fingerprint stays the same in incognito private mode even when browser data is purged. Essentially, if let's say I visit several times, right? So you can see here my visit count is 1. If I refresh this page, let's refresh this page, I can see my tag being loaded over here, and you can see that this is 157, right? Let me refresh it. You can see 158. Now there's a separate line item. And if I scroll down, this would be the exact same metric as my first visit, right? So if I scroll down, you can see my visit count is 2 now because I've refreshed the page, right? So if I refresh the page again, there will be a 159 that appears. Let me refresh my Superbase data. The 159 appears and you can click in, and then you can see my page visit is 3. The fingerprint is always the same because this hash is unique based on the laptop I'm using, which is locally stored as well. So I can see here, if I click inspect and if I click application, let me do a test right now, right? I'll clear all my cookies. All cookies clear. If all cookies are cleared, that means from a traditional tracking standpoint, everything's gone. But if I refresh it, okay, the unfortunate truth, okay, yeah, this is a hackathon, right? It's not working. Why? Because I have to give consent to it, right? So if only when I give consent to it, then my tag will fire. I would say from a Google Tag Manager installation standpoint, right, I've actually made very clear parameters to only fire the tags only if consent is given. I do know for certain companies, right, they're not very stringent on consent and they basically just fire all the cookies. Going back to this demonstration, if I were to accept these cookies, right, okay, I accepted it already. So if I go inspect, if I click on application, yep, my cookies are there. I should have a 160 over here. Yep, 160. And let's see what the visit count is, because my fingerprint ID should be exactly the same. Yeah. So you can see here, my visit count is 4. Why? Because my fingerprint ID 0168, even if I clear cookies, the tracking is still in place of sorts. So I can stitch a specific user journey even if people clear the cookies. But in this case, unfortunately or fortunately, that's where I do think it's important to seek the consent of users, right? Because the moment people don't consent to being tracked, I would say from a very black and white legal standpoint, you should not track them in the first place. So you might ask me like, hey JJ, this might be useful and what, but how does it really lead to me tracking the best quality conversions down the road? Glad you asked, right? So this is just a sample form I created. So there are CTA buttons like order now, WhatsApp. The prototype I've built so far works very well with lead form. So if I can type my name here and just type my email here, just a sample email, right? So I say this is a sample message. Okay, let's go back to Superbase. It's 160 right now. There are no additional events, right? If I click send message, okay, thanks, we have received your message. The thing is, this backend data, the script that I've installed on GTM, this will actually collect the email. Okay, so if you see on the back end over here, right, if I click refresh over here, if you can see row 161, you can see the email, it populates it accordingly. The email is here. So this is extremely valuable information, right? Because I have the email collected. I have all the good information that I've collected together with this email. I have the Facebook cookies, I have the IP address, I have the user agent, I have every single parameter of their UTMs. I have the user status. So the user status would then be promoted from visitor to lead. So if I can show you the previous payloads, right? User status is lead. So I'll be curious to know what were the previous user status. So what were the previous user status, if any? So you can see here user status visitor. The latest one I had was a lead as well. From this point on, let's assume that the lead form, this phone number and name goes to like our sales team, and let's imagine that the cycle of like talking to them on the phone and qualifying them, right, would take like literally 1 month to 2 months, right? It doesn't really matter because I already have that email associated with the particular lead already. If I give my salespeople, let's say 100 emails, right, and my salespeople talk to them and they specifically know which email, which name converted as well. So the moment I actually just have a list of emails that converted with my sales team, this is where I can backtrack to the data I've collected over here, which means to say that I can then use this data to then send back the best conversion events back to the ads platform. So whether it's Facebook, Google, TikTok, LinkedIn, all of the ad platforms support some sort of server-side tracking and attribution where you send this data back to the platform. So this, I would say, is sort of overlapping with the video I have covered here for Meta Ads server-side tracking. So this is where it goes into a full picture, and I assume this is what Hyros does, right? In all transparency, I'm actually testing this with some of my clients, and if you're watching this video, right, if you want to test it, I'll be happy to even implement this for you for free, because I really just want to see if it's useful at all. Of course, every software has a certain advantage and disadvantage. In all transparency, I'm also in this sort of mini journey to see if I can create something for myself, right? Not to say I want to compete with Hyros. Of course, I definitely cannot compete with Hyros. But let's say if it comes to you wanting to own your own data, this might be a suitable approach of which you could try as well. So I'm happy to actually even give you the codes and guide you how to set it up. So I think that's actually pretty much it for what I have demonstrated so far. Let me just recap what I've just elaborated. The moment a page loads with consent, it grabs everything. It grabs a Facebook click, UTMs, Facebook cookies, it grabs every single thing. The fingerprint is more durable than a cookie. So even if a user clears their cache, this ID will persist as what we have just shown earlier as well. All this is stored in local storage as a permanent first touch record. So the first touch record, it's something that you can see. Yep, so as you can see here, this is all the good stuff that you want to collect to send to our database accordingly. So just to clarify, this is sent to a Cloudflare worker. At this moment, I won't share the code for the Cloudflare worker because there's actually a lot of security details that I need to consider. Let's move on to part 2, the gateway. The GTM script sends its payload to a serverless function running on Cloudflare. This Cloudflare actually adds to this data. It adds the user's IP location and validates the request to make sure like it's not a scam payload as well. Cloudflare will then dump the data on Superbase with a clean JSON payload, and this is our source of truth. So the downsides of what I've learned in this hackathon: consent is still king. I think it's still very important to respect the users when it comes to them consenting to be tracked as well. The next downside is fingerprint is a moving target. So as of today's recording, when I went to check out the GitHub of the fingerprint code, there are issues with certain browsers like Firefox. Certain browsers actually take a lot of proactive measures to make sure that it is resistant to fingerprinting. That's the unfortunate truth. I think actually staff from fingerprint.com actually replied, but given that this is a open source code, right, they probably can't guarantee any prompt response for now. This user says starting from version 1.45, Firefox has made it a feature in strict protection and private Windows mode. there are different fingerprints each time. So unfortunately, tracking will always be not perfect, but I'll say this is definitely better than cookies per se. The downside is that it's code, right? So I know traditionally on this channel, I talk about NAN automations. I'll bring NAN later into this video. But yeah, if you're not familiar with GTM's JavaScript, this might be a little bit more intimidating. Future consideration on what next, right? So the data pipeline works. So this is just part one. Next is a feedback loop. I'm going to build an NAN workflow to take all this information from Supabase to then visualize it accordingly. And of course, we want to use it in a dashboard. So I've actually mocked up a dashboard already. And this is a dashboard that I can actually connect to Supabase itself. And I've created all this dummy data, but the purpose of this system should be able to achieve just this, right? So if I can just demonstrate the user identity, if I scroll down, these are all dummy data in terms of how many times a specific user has visited the website and how they visited the website and what UTMs they had. You can see this user had a page view here, 10th of November, 10th of November, 10th of November. This user visited a total of 4 times and finally converted on the 4th visit. And they came from Facebook CPC, and you can see that there are different campaign UTMs and ads attached to them. This will provide every single touch point a user has with your website so that you can literally stitch a user journey and see in extreme detail how they interact with your website. I've also taken the liberty to ask ChatGPT to sort of compare my product with Hyros, right? So I definitely know my hackathon is far from what Hyros is. I think where this mini hackathon shines, right, is the data ownership, right? Obviously, Hyros is a company that needs to make a lot of money. And I think they're valued at like, what, 300 million based on the videos I've seen from Alex Becker. So this is my project, right? I'm building a privacy-safe, high-trust event ingestion pipeline. The script on GTM loads page views and all these events, and it sends a payload with these kind of security measures accordingly. And then there's a Cloudflare worker that then considers these security layers and then transform it and then sends it to the Supabase. So there's a privacy-first attribution analytics platform built on Cloudflare workers. So I've asked you to compare it with Hyros. I'll say my system maybe is better in privacy, compliance, data ownership, cost, flexibility, and I'm using NAN, I'm using first-party architecture. And of course, Hyros is really a very fleshed out software already. So I think there's a lot more manual code I'm using given that this is a hackathon, right? I'm just using this hackathon to really learn a little bit more about attribution, because at the end of the day, when I made this video about server-side meta ads tracking, right, there's a lot of limitations because I realized most advertisers don't even collect any of their Facebook cookies or clicks. So I went down this rabbit hole. Can I write a script to capture as much Facebook cookies as much as possible? That's where I landed on fingerprint.js and realized there's actually a lot more things you can do, right? Because I own all the data, I can generate any attribution model in SQL. Whereas Hyros gives a default dashboard based on first click, last click. The end goal of what I want is really to be able to have conversion API to be as best as possible to the ads platform. So Meta conversion API, TikTok conversion API, Google enhanced conversion, LinkedIn conversion API. This is, I believe, what Hyros is also doing. It's marketing to advertisers to say that we want to send the best quality data back to the ads platform. The dashboard I'm building is based on Supabase SQL. I can use Meta-based Power BI, Looker Studio, Retool, any dashboarding platforms, but for Hyros, it's an inbuilt dashboard because you're paying for the software itself. I would say this is probably where it might be better from a cost standpoint, right? The Cloudflare workers are extremely cheap, Supabase extremely cheap, NAN is almost zero. Hyros, I do understand that it can cost a few thousand or at least up to 1,000 to 2,000 per month. You have no ownership of your data because all your data is sent to Hyros, right? And there's probably locked contracts. I can also run through a little bit of NAN just before I end this video, right? So essentially what I want to do with all these workflows, I then have this NAN workflow to then classify them to their respective categories. I can see their customer journeys, the daily trends, performance based on their source medium, and then basically this workflow then sorts this out where my Looker Studio will be able to create a more nicer picture of a user journey. So the purpose of this is to turn the raw data I have here, because obviously I cannot create a dashboard based on this data, right? But assuming I have, let's say, 1 month's worth of data, there might be several thousand rows over here, right? I can then stitch it accordingly, form something like this where I have an event ID, and then I'll split everything per source medium, per date, per time with the content here. This is where the raw data of everything would then be put together and stitched together. So this is where NAN comes in, and I will say this workflow is actually quite straightforward. There's this raw data over here. Everything has not been processed and it'll be labeled as true once it has been processed. Then in a sense, you can sort of delete all this data. So this is where we want to have a system where it's also cost efficient. You don't want to store too much data or unnecessary data after you have processed them, right? I'm actually actively finding businesses to implement this for free. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.